Joshua chapter 16 this morning, if you would, please. Joshua, the 16th chapter. We are in the midst of Joshua recounting the allocation of the land in Canaan, that is to the west of the Jordan, to the tribes of Israel. The process had already begun in chapter 15 with the tribe of Judah. You remember the largest tribe described in Numbers 26, receiving the first and largest territory in Canaan, although much of the territory would be uninhabitable to them, and some of it would be shared with Simeon. We'll see that later in this story. But nonetheless, we've already seen this allocation beginning with that tribe. So we come this morning to chapters 16 and 17. These two chapters are dedicated to the allocation of the land of Canaan to the descendants of Joseph, Now, more specifically, to the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's sons. You remember they were blessed by Jacob as Joseph's heritage. Now, there's a chapter break that occurs between 16 and 17, but it's really a single allocation, starting in 16 and going all the way through 17. The beginning verse says, for the people of Joseph, for the allotment of the people of Joseph. All right, so the start of the chapter leads us through the entirety of the allocation to the people of Joseph. So even though you find a chapter break in your Bible at chapter 17, verse 1, there really doesn't belong one there, because we're really looking at a single pericope covering both chapters, the entirety of the whole thing. Now, as I said, the blessing of Jacob, of Joseph's sons, recorded in Genesis 48, did two things to the descendants of Joseph. Number one, it gave to Joseph a double blessing. Typically in Israel, the double blessing was given to the firstborn son of the father. Typically, the double portion of the inheritance under the law was given to the firstborn son. But Reuben did not qualify, quote unquote, as the firstborn anymore. That honor was being given to Joseph. There were two allocations, therefore, being given to him because of his faithfulness in Egypt. But the second thing that Jacob's blessing did, and I've got three men whose names all start with J that I got to struggle with this week. Jacob and Joseph and Joshua. So if I get it mixed up, just fill in the right name, okay? The second thing it did is it gave to Ephraim, or it elevated Ephraim, the second-born son, over Manasseh, the older son. You remember the pattern in the book of Genesis. It's never the firstborn son that becomes the means through which the blessing flows. It wasn't Ishmael to Abraham, it was Isaac. It wasn't Esau, it was Jacob. And now it's not Reuben, it wasn't Reuben, it's Joseph, and it's not Manasseh, it's Ephraim. This is a pattern done on purpose in the book of Genesis to show that it is God's ways of ordering these things, not men's ways of ordering these things. So this blessing of Jacob in Genesis 48 gives to Joseph a double blessing to be passed to his sons, who are then reordered, not in according to their birth order. So what we have here is the lot now falls to Joseph, to the people of Joseph next, okay, after Judah. But the allotment is made to Ephraim first in the west, because he was elevated over his brother by Jacob. So the order that we see here is the order in the blessing given by Jacob to the sons. Now, let me remind you again that we do not officially know why Moses included part of Manasseh for a Transjordan allotment. Although, as I said, you remember when we talked about that some weeks ago, my opinion is that it scatters the descendants of Joseph over all of the territory of the Israelites because of this blessing that Jacob had given to Joseph. That Joseph, because of his faithfulness, deserved a super blessing over his brothers. And so Moses includes a part of Manasseh on the eastern side of the Jordan to say all of Canaan is going to be blessed by the sons of Joseph. At least in my opinion, that's how I see it. So these chapters, 16 and 17, employ the following structure. First, the space allotted to Joseph. The first 4 verses of the chapter will outline the borders of where the totality of the space will be given to Joseph. And then in verses 5 to 10, the space that's allotted specifically to Ephraim. In verses 17, 1 to 13, the space allotted to Manasseh. There's an embedded story of another special allotment in verses 3 to 6 in that section. And then finally, the last verses, 14 to 18, are a complaint lodged by the 2 tribes. So it's one pericope discussing the issues of Joseph. It begins with all of where his territory is, then the 2 sons with an embedded story, and then a complaint at the end. All right, so that's the form we're going to take this morning. Now, in the first 4 verses, Joshua outlines the borders of where the territory of the sons of Joseph will be in Canaan. As in the case of Judah, chapter 15, he's going to do the same here. Although Joshua does not record it initially, this allotment is made by lot. Okay, notice at the beginning of chapter 16, it doesn't say that the lot falls to Jacob. That's insinuated in 17:14, which gives me my evidence, by the way, for my claim last week that I think it was a lot that fell first to Judah, and even though Joshua does not record it, fell by lot. The lot falls to the next son of Jacob to receive an inheritance in Canaan. First son was Judah, now the son Joseph. And the lot also specifies where the allotment is to be made within the territory. The lot and the description given sets the allotment for the descendants of Joseph, in this case, to occupy most of the central territory of Canaan from the Jordan west to the Great Sea. If you look on the back of your bulletin, you'll see a map. And in that map, I've show you that, or it's shown on the map. Okay, so you'll see that the territory extends from the Jordan all the way to the sea in the middle part of Canaan. It pretty much covers most of the central section of the land of Canaan from the river to the sea. Now, there will be allotments for Benjamin, Dan, and Issachar that will intrude upon these allocations later. We'll see that same thing when we see Simeon intrude on Judah later on. But the 2 tribes, West Manasseh and Ephraim, would still get the greatest share of space in central Canaan. To the north of Judah, they're going to get most of the block in the middle of the section. So you'll see that central piece belongs to them. The land of Joseph's descendants, therefore, would comprise the greatest part of the hill country. You see that hill country on the right side of your map. There's a section of hill country that sort of sits over there towards the Jordan. Remember, I've said a number of times that Israel can be divided into 4 zones. Moving from west to east, you have the plains at the sea, then you have the hill country, and then you have the Jordan Valley, and then you have the area to the Transjordan. Those are the 4 main slices of the land. The hill country, in that section from after the valleys but before the Jordan, that hill country is going to be occupied mostly by the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim. They're the ones that are going to occupy most of that space. You'll see that again a little bit more later. So what Joshua does in these first 4 verses, and I'm not going to try to exegete them, just accept the map as you see it. The allotment for Joseph as a whole is drawn out first. Then the specific allocations for his sons are designed within that space. So what you get in the first 4 verses then is the territory of where the 2 tribes are going to be, and then as we move into the remaining verses, that space is going to be broken up. The blessing given to Joseph is for his 2 sons to be given unique allocations within Canaan, but within his position as a direct son of Jacob. So the lot falls to Joseph, therefore a space for Joseph is carved out, but then that space is divided between the 2 sons, each getting a specific territory, and it then becomes their territory. It's the territory of Ephraim and the territory of Manasseh. We don't call it the territory of Joseph, even though it starts that way, okay? Now, this explains Joshua's statement in 17:17, where he says, "You are a numerous people and of great power. You shall not have one allotment only." It's 2 allotments in an official sense. Unofficially, it's within the space of where Joseph is being allocated. So it's 2 allotments, yes, but it's a single allotment within the space of Joseph. So it's a bit confusing because the lot falls to Joseph, but my guess is, I can't prove this, but my guess is they cast lots then to discover where the 2 tribes would wind up actually occupying space inside there, if we are consistent with what we've seen so far. The 2 sons will each receive a space and be separate from each other rather than being mixed together. Each son of Joseph will technically receive an allotment. The other tribes did not have this done for them. The other tribes didn't have sons below them that are then divided into spaces. The sons of Simeon or Judah, for example, are given a space, and that's it. The whole tribe belongs to that territory. In the case of the sons of Joseph, it's broken up. So it's a bit confusing, but not so much if you just kind of step back. So verses 5 to 10 then, Joshua outlines the allotment given to Ephraim first. You remember there was a rule here, and the rule was that the larger tribes were to receive larger space, smaller tribes smaller space. Now in this case, if you go back to Numbers 26, you see that Ephraim numbered 32,500, according to verse 37 of that chapter, 32,500, whereas Manasseh numbered 52,700, significantly larger. So Ephraim was significantly smaller than Manasseh. So if you look on the map, his space is smaller than the area of Manasseh. Now again, I'm thinking of this only on the western side of the Jordan. The space on the eastern side was a very large territory given to them over there, but that's not the issue here. The issue over here is done by lot. That allotment over there on the east was done just by Moses saying, this is where it's going to be. But this is being done in a different way. But as I said earlier, Ephraim is allotted space first because he was blessed by Jacob over his older brother. Jacob had purposely given the firstborn blessing to Ephraim in Genesis 48:19 and following. The allotment to Ephraim may look small, but in reality, Ephraim is in the prime hill country from Jericho north. Okay? The tribe of Ephraim is going to get, for all practical purposes, the best of the hill country from Jericho north, and then down into the valley towards the west, about the bottom 1/3 of the space allotted to Joseph in Canaan. So you take the whole space of Manasseh and Ephraim, and take that whole block, they're getting about the bottom 1/3 of that, but they're getting really, in many ways, the best part of the hill country. You'll see that later when we come to their complaint. In verse 10, it says, however, they did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, so the Canaanites have lived in the midst of Ephraim to this day, but have been made to do forced labor. Hold that verse in your mind for a minute. We'll come back to it. Now, we move then into chapter 17. As I said, this is just one big long pericope, so we're just moving on in verses. What we come to now is the allotment for Manasseh in Canaan. That's the western Manasseh tribe. The reference in 17:1 and verses 5 and 6 to Gilead and Bashan is a reference to the allotment already made to East Manasseh in the Transjordan. Okay, so notice verse 1. The allotment was made to the people of Manasseh, for he is the firstborn of Joseph. Okay. Stop. Full stop. New sentence. To Machir, the firstborn of Manasseh, the father of Gilead, were allotted Gilead and Bashan because he was a man of war. And allotments were made to the rest of the people of Manasseh by their clans. Now, that first sentence is simply a review of what's already been done on the on the eastern side of the Jordan. I can confuse you really easily if I don't get my directions right here, right? The first sentence is Joshua simply reminding everybody that Manasseh has already received an allotment on the eastern side of the Jordan in two areas identified over there, Bashan and Gilead. You see it on your map. It's a big wide area or big wide space where East Manasseh is living, Bashan and Gilead. And we know from earlier lesson that the men of Gilead, the men of Machir, had actually gone and taken that space. And you remember even that Joshua had taken Og, the king of Bashan, in that space, and that Moses had allocated that space to the half-tribe of Manasseh that would reside in the Transjordan. Okay, so you saw that earlier. So what you have in verse 2 is a summary of the allotment of Canaan. Let me restart. The first sentence, verse 1, I'm really confusing myself. I imagine you are just like, what? Okay, let me start over. Verse 1 of chapter 17 is a summary of what has already happened on the eastern side of the Jordan. Therefore, verse 2 is a summary of what will happen on the western side of the Jordan. So all Joshua is doing is simply saying, we did this once, now let's turn our attention to where we're going now. Because the 5 tribes mentioned in verse 2, or the clans, I should say, not tribes, clans, in verse 2, are now the ones that are going to be allocated land on the western side of Jordan in Canaan. The allotment to West Manasseh was also in the prime hill country from Jericho north, and then down into the valley towards the west all the way to the sea, the entire middle of Canaan. Again, you see that on your map. So what happens is, the lot is cast for Joseph, so the entire space is designed for Joseph. And then the rest of chapter 16 is, here's where the clans of Ephraim are going to wind up, and the space for Ephraim is allocated. And then chapter 17, basically verses 14 and beyond, is where the clans of Manasseh will wind up in the center of Canaan. Now, I know that sounds really complicated, but it's really not. It's a lot simpler. It's right there on your map. Just read the map. But there is something in these two allotments that needs our attention, far more than the allotments themselves. Again, as I said last week, the actual physical area on the map is open to much debate. Nobody really knows exactly where all these lines are drawn because most of these places don't exist anymore, and so it's almost impossible to figure out exactly where the line goes. So this is a best guess. I compared about a dozen different maps that I found out there on the internet this week, and they all look about the same. They're slightly different, but they're all about the same because we don't know exactly where it is. We just know Ephraim is sort of here, Manasseh is sort of here, and that's kind of where it is. But there are two verses that really deserve our attention. 16:10, which I read a minute ago, and 17:13, which looks very similar to it. It says, "Now when the people of Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not utterly drive them out." So you see that twice in this pericope. The conquest under Joshua, you remember, was not complete upon his death. That's an important thing to remember. It is only beginning under Joshua. It's going to take 400 years for the conquest to actually be completed by the time of David. Many Canaanites still remain in the land. We've already seen a couple of examples. The Jebusites in Jerusalem. It says that they didn't take Jerusalem because the Jebusites still hold it. And Joshua writes that the Jebusites are still living with us even to this day. So even as Joshua comes to the end of his life, the Jebusites still own that city. It'll be David 400 years from now that'll finally take that city and make it part of Israel. Okay, so the Jebusites are there. We've got the Canaanites in Gezer in 1610. We've got many other Canaanites. You see them in the book of Judges over and over and over again. The Philistines are still occupying the coastal area along the sea all the way until David kills Goliath. That's 400 years future, by the way. So the conquest under Joshua is not complete. The people, therefore, will need to coexist with the natives that remain and continue the process of eradicating them from the land. The process now underway, the process being described here, is simply to allot the land, although the people will not take up direct residence of it. They won't fan out and occupy everywhere until after Joshua's death. If you read the first part, you read the first chapter of the book of Judges, Joshua dies, God comes to him and says, okay, go live in the land. Who's going to be the first to go? And the people of Judah say, we'll go first. Okay, so the process is just getting started. We're just drawing the boundaries here at this particular point. Now, the Israelites did have some measure of success against the natives during this initial conquest. A number of cities were destroyed and the natives were wiped out from those cities. We've seen that in the northern and southern conquest we looked at earlier in this book. So the Israelites have had some measure of success. But they've also, with some of those natives, managed to conscript them to forced labor. Notice the term forced labor is used in both 1610 and 1713. Apparently, they were able to take over some of these people and bring them into forced labor, force them into positions of serving them. Now, let's be clear about something here. This is a compromise that would haunt them for a long, long time. It is a compromise. Yahweh had commanded the Israelites to utterly destroy the natives. He had brought down his judgment upon the Amorites because he said, even to Abraham, their sin is not yet complete, but it is now. God's patience with them has run out. They have refused to turn and acknowledge him as the Creator. They have become degraded and depraved in ways unimaginable to our thinking. And God has said they need to be destroyed under his edict of judgment. And the Israelites have done some of that, but not enough of that. So instead of destroying these natives, they've actually embraced them as slaves. That is a compromise that will be a problem. The Israelites probably felt that subscripting some of them to serve Israel would be a better choice. I mean, after all, why kill them when we can use them as forced labor, right? Well, you're going to find yourself, if you know the history of Israel, looking back upon this decision and realizing that it is an error and one that will haunt them all the way to the exile of the southern kingdom in 586. So, we've started this chapter by noting the allotment given to Joseph as a whole. Then we saw how that allotment was broken down between Ephraim and Manasseh. We've assessed this problem, this compromise that the Israelites are beginning to make in Israel, in Canaan, even at this time. But there's an embedded story here that you need to see. And it's in verses 3 through 6 of chapter 17. Verses 3 through 6. Now Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, had no sons but only daughters. And these are the names of his daughters: Mahlah, Noah, Haglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They approached Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun and the leaders and said, "The Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance along with our brothers. So according to the mouth of the Lord, he gave them an inheritance among the brothers of their fathers." Let me stop there. Does that story sound familiar to you? Do those names of those daughters sound familiar to you? Well, they should, because last week Tim read the story of these 5 girls in Numbers 27. It's actually a story we've just seen. The story included here is similar to the story of Caleb in the previous chapter under Judah. You remember that Caleb had been given a special allotment by Moses, by God, because he had been faithful. And so then, when the time comes, he comes to Joshua and says, hey, remember, I'm this 85-year-old guy that was there when we went in. You owe me some land. This is the same thing. This is an ancient promise that's now coming to fruition. The 5 daughters of Zelophehad, the eventual descendant of Manasseh, come to Joshua now to get the inheritance that they were promised by Moses back in Numbers 27. There's a 400-year gap, of course, between Manasseh and these girls, or these women. There's a 400-year gap here. Joshua records just a few generations coming from Manasseh. He records it as Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh. There's no way to connect Manasseh to Zelophehad in just 5 generations. Can't be done. Unless these men lived to be 200 years old and had children when they were 180 years old, it's not possible to make that connection. So more than likely what is actually being recorded here is a shortened genealogy. Not unusual for Israelites to do that. Hebrews often did this in their genealogies. Somewhere between Zelophehad and Manasseh, there are a bunch of names that are not included. I'm guessing that it's probably between Hepher and Gilead. That's where I'm guessing that it is. There's a whole bunch of names missing in there. But I point that out just so that you don't try to do the math and go, this doesn't make any sense. Zelophehad had died in the wilderness. In Numbers 27, the daughters of Zelophehad, the 5 women who are named here, come to Moses, and they say to Moses, our father died in the wilderness. And they specifically point out that Zelophehad did not die in Korah's rebellion. Okay, we've talked about Korah's rebellion in the past, right? He did not die in that. He died of his own sin, which means he just died because he was one of the generation of Israelites that refused to go into the land when they had the opportunity. So he's just one of the however many Israelites perished in the wilderness under that edict of God where God said this entire generation is going to die. Only 2 survived out of that generation, 1 Caleb, 1 Joshua. But these 5 girls then come and say, we were promised land because Zelophehad had no son. And we approached Moses and asked Moses to give a dispensation to us. So in Numbers 27, Moses brings their case before the Lord. He brings the case of these 5 girls before the Lord. And Yahweh does 2 things with their request. The first thing that he does is he transfers the allotment, the inheritance of Zelophehad, to his brothers. So he sends the allotment that would have gone to Zelophehad to his brothers, Zelophehad's brothers, because he has no son, therefore transfers to his brothers. But he then turns and says, and these women then, these daughters, get a portion of that because he had no son. Yahweh creates an exception in the law for a man who dies without any sons. And that exception is to give the land to the brothers of the man who died without sons, but then to include the daughters of the man underneath that. Because what would have normally happened is if Zelophehad had had a son, then the transfer of land would have been to the son, and then the son would have been responsible for his sisters. But because it's being transferred out of his family, now the sisters are technically left destitute. So God connects the sisters to the brother of the man who had died, so that they're taken care of. Again, this is a patriarchy, and the substance of the land is being put to another male somewhere. He doesn't transfer directly to the women. He transfers it to other men and then makes provision for them under those men. So that's one thing that Yahweh does. But the second thing that he does is he modifies the law to include inheritances for daughters of a man who dies without sons. There is a provision now in the law for a girl who is a daughter of a man who dies without a son. So Yahweh is merciful here. Yahweh doesn't go, well, that's just the law. That's how it works. Too bad. Sorry. Moses makes an appeal on the basis of these women, and God grants him mercy in that and makes an adjustment to the law to cover this sort of matter. So what we have here is the women coming to Joshua and saying, Moses gave our father an inheritance transferred to his brothers, which means that we now get an allotment of land. So where are we supposed to go? Where do we belong? And that's what this story is. And it says that Joshua did that. That Joshua gave them a portion. It says in verse 5, thus there fell to Manasseh 10 portions beside the land of Gilead and Bashan, which is on the other side of the Jordan. Okay, so within the western side of the Jordan, 10 portions. Because the daughters of Manasseh received an inheritance along with his sons. The daughters, in this case, being these daughters of Zelophehad. The land of Gilead was allotted to the rest of the people of Manasseh. There are, in this case, an allotment of 10 portions. Compare verse 5 to verse 2. Back in verse 2 it says, these are the names of those made by clan. Abizir, Helik, Azriel, Shechem, Hefer, and Shemitah. Okay? One of those names then has already been discussed, a man by the name of Hefer. His line is then granted to the 5 daughters because he is the ancestor of this Zelophehad. So the 10 portions would be Abizir, Helik, Azriel, Shechem, Shemitah, that's 5, and then the 5 daughters of Zelophehad, that's 10. Heifer's portion is being given, if you will, to these 5 girls. And so you see these 10 portions. That's how you make sense of all these numbers in the middle of this. But the point of this story is that, once again, like Caleb, there's a special personal allotment being made that had been made by promise years before that is now being honored. What Moses had granted, God comes along and says, yes, that's going to happen. All right. So that's chapter 16 and 17. Fascinating, isn't it? But there's one more story that is a part of this. And it comes at the end of chapter 17. In verse 14, the people of Joseph spoke to Joshua. Okay, so tribal leaders from both Ephraim and Manasseh come to Joshua and they say, why have you given me, that would be us, why have you given us but one lot and one portion as an inheritance, although I am, or we are, a numerous people, since all along the Lord has blessed me, or blessed us? They lodge a complaint. What's their complaint? Well, how come we're only getting one allotment when we're really 2 different tribes? Why are we getting just one particular space? The implication of their question is, doesn't the blessing given to Joseph mean that we should get unique lots and separate portions, meaning a lot should be cast for both of us within the framework of the sons of Jacob? Now, as I said earlier, I think there were lots cast below Joseph, but the space itself didn't change because of the second set of lots. So they're coming and complaining, wait, we're sons of Jacob just as much as, Judah was, so how come we don't get a piece of territory based on lot? In other words, the people are coming to complain that the 2 tribes feel that their allotted space is too small or too cramped. They're complaining about the size of it. It's too small. It's too cramped. Look how Joshua responds. He says, verse 15, If you are a numerous people, that's not an if, that's because you are a numerous people, right? Go up by yourselves to the forest, and there clear ground for yourself in the land of the Perizzites and the Rephaims, since the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you. Now, what's he saying? He's saying, listen, you need to do two things. You need to branch out from where you think you can live in this hill country to the forest territory. If you're a numerous people, and you are, right? Verse 17, he says that directly. Then you have the power to take the entirety of the space allocated to you. The complaint of the two tribes is, well, you've stuffed us into a small space and we can't there's not enough space for all of us in the space. And Joshua's going, there's all kinds of space. What are you talking about? You have the power to take the entirety of the space allotted to you, even into areas that are not automatically agreeable to you. Yeah, okay, the northern hill country may be covered by a forest. So, go chop down the trees and farm the land. People do it all the time. In fact, by the way, just so you will know as an aside, the nation of Israel became one of the first nations on this planet to discover new methods of farming to take advantage of the hill country. Terracing was first done by Israelites in ancient days, to take hill country and terrace it so that it could be flattened and used to plant crops. They were one of the first nations to do this because of this sort of command. Go take this space. Don't just whine about the fact that there's all these trees there and you can't plant crops. Go and cut them down and use the wood for other things and plant crops. But then they complain a second time. Verse 16. The hill country is not enough for us. Okay, even if we did all of that, we still don't have enough space. Yet all the Canaanites who dwell in the plain have chariots of iron, both those in Beth Shean and its villages and those in the valley of Jezreel. In other words, they say to him, well, yeah, even if we went and took all the space, we still wouldn't have enough. But we can't move into the valley to the west because there's Canaanites living there that are more powerful than us. They've got iron chariots, which is a way of saying their weapons are stronger than ours and we probably wouldn't be able to conquer them, and so you're forcing us to live in the hill country. And again, Joshua responds to that. They respond. He says, verse 17, you are a numerous people and of great power. This time he doesn't form it in a question. Notice he just states it flat out, right? You are a numerous people and have great power. You shall not have one allotment only, but the hill country shall be yours. For though it is a forest, you shall clear it and possess it to its farthest borders. For you shall drive out the Canaanites, though they have chariots of iron and though they are strong. Joshua's response to this is, stop your whining. You've been given this hill country, now go and clear it. And if that's not enough, then move to the west and go down into the valley and drive out the Canaanites that are living there. Now, one of the fundamental points of this book is there's a sense within the book of Joshua, and we've seen this all the way through, that Joshua is under the assumption that it is Yahweh that is going to fight for the people and settle them in this land. The assumption has never been by Joshua that the people are going to have to try somehow to overcome all these enemies on their own, with their own strength and their own power. But you will notice that's exactly how these people begin to respond now. They have what one commentator calls a form of spiritual slippage. They have this idea that now, how are we going to do this? They have failed. They are failing to follow the direction and confidence of the Lord as Joshua himself sees it. I mean, listen to Joshua's response. Stop your whining. Go cut down the forests. Go plant crops there. Move out from there down into the valley. If that means you have to attack the people that have iron chariots, so be it. But look, it's not your problem. Yahweh is the one that's going to be doing this. You are sitting there thinking you can't overcome these problems. But the problems are not yours. The problems are Yahweh's problems. So go do it. And Joshua even goes so far as to say, you shall drive them out. He doesn't say, well, you might be able to drive them out, or if you work hard enough at it, you'll drive them out, or if Yahweh is kind to you, you shall. No. Joshua's response is, you shall drive them out. Joshua has this great confidence that it is Yahweh that is leading these people into these places. So what you have here is the first complaint about this allotment being made. Oh, this is not, we can't fit in this space. You just put, we need bigger space. Give us 2 allotments instead of 1. Open up the space so we have more space. Give us, let us go further this way or that way, which is somewhat ironical to me, as though they deserve more, right? And Joshua says, no, this is what the Lord has decided based on the fall of the lot, and you shall do what you need to do. Trust in the Lord and go and occupy this space. And it's great space. I don't know why you're complaining. It's great space. So as I was considering this chapter, two chapters, this story, I was thinking about this whining of the people of this space and complaining about the fact they didn't get enough land, and I was thinking about that, and I was comparing that in my mind to the daughters of Zelophehad, who actually come to Joshua and say, hey, the Lord promised us this, give it to us. One group, these women, come with a sense of faith, and the rest of the tribe of Joseph comes with the opposite of that. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about who all these people are. Who are all these people? These are all people who are descended from Joseph. They come from Joseph. He is the patriarch, if you will, of this tribe, or 2 tribes. And as we think about Joseph, what comes to our mind? When we think about this man who lived 400 years earlier, what do we think of Joseph? If there's one word we can use to describe the man, the word that comes to my mind best is the word faithful. Faithful. Joseph was faithful. What set him apart from his brothers is that he was faithful. What set him apart from all the other brothers of Jacob was that he was a man who, in spite of being cast away by them, the Lord raised him up and used his faithfulness to save his family. And, one step further here, not only did he save Jacob and his sons, but even save this entire nation that is now taking this land. Yes, I know that it's often spoken of as God doing these things, but let's be clear. Joseph was a man of faithfulness. This is how he says it to his brothers. You remember his brothers discovered that it's him when they arrived there in Egypt, and he finally reveals himself to them in Genesis 45, and he says this to them. He says, "Come near to me, please." And they came near, and he said, "I'm your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God." Then, of course, we follow that up with that great statement of Joseph to his brothers in chapter 50 when he says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." We often miss the second half of that phrase. Why did God bring Joseph to Egypt? Why did Joseph resist Potiphar's wife and find himself in jail? Why did he stay there for so many years until he was finally elevated there to the prime minister position in Egypt? Why was he faithful. Answer, so that this very people would exist. If it wouldn't have been for his faithfulness, if it wouldn't have been for God using him and his faithfulness, they would not have survived. It was Joseph who understood that there was going to be 7 years of famine after 7 years of good. He's the one who understood that. And he's the one who told Pharaoh that. And he's the one who was appointed to actually make the people survive during that period of time. It was him. He did that. It was God who brought him to that place, but his faithfulness, his choice to be faithful unto God and to be the instrument that God would use, the means that God would use to save the people that God had purposed and set aside to himself is obvious, is it not? Joseph left a legacy. Joseph left a legacy of faithfulness. A legacy that would be rewarded as an entire nation entered into the promise of God made to his great-grandfather. The allotment that we see taking place in these chapters is his legacy visible now. His faithfulness to do what God had put in his heart and in his mind to do meant that these people actually lived. This nation actually grew up. Now, true, it wasn't perfect. Yeah, it wasn't perfect. His descendants didn't trust God fully. They whine and complain about what they get. Yeah, it wasn't fully. And it took 400 years further for it to come to fruition. But it came to pass nonetheless because God honored that faithfulness. God looked at that man and said, that man was faithful, and I'm going to give a blessing to his descendants. I'm going to give them a double blessing and make his 2 sons even to be the recipients of a blessing. The eldest son blessing. God sent that down by his legacy. Now, let me make that very practical for you. Did you know that we have in this church 69 children on our roster? 69. Now, that's 11 in Phillipsburg and the rest here, but nonetheless, 69 children that the Lord has blessed us. Out of 195 on the roster, that means that a third of our congregation is under the age of 18. When I tell that to pastors, they look at me like, what? That's not possible. There's no churches that have that kind of children anymore. That doesn't happen. I mean, we would kill for one. But the Lord has blessed us with a legacy of children, which, by the way, helps explain the noise. Okay? A good thing, by the way. So what legacy are we leaving these children? What's the legacy we're leaving? And let me suggest that on 3 fronts: as a church, as parents and grandparents, and as families. What legacy are we leaving for these children? When these children observe us, what do they see? What do they see? What do they hear? Do they see us as a people believing the promises of God? Do they see us with the kind of faith that Joseph had and the legacy that he left, in which they look at us and they see us faithfully being led by the Spirit of God through the Word and prayer in every area of life? Do they see that in us? Do they see us as a church, for example, standing firm upon the idea that the Word of God is central and important to their lives and that they should know it? And do they see that? Did they experience that? Do they know that's what's happening? Or are they seeing something else? When they watch you, mommy and daddy, Do they see in you a true trust in the Lord in all of the ways that you speak with one another and choose your entertainments and the choices that you make in life and the things that you think are important and of high priority? Do they see in you faithfulness when they observe you? Oh, yes, I know. They hear from you that these things are important, but do they see it? And I know, yes, as a church, they hear it from us that we think the Bible is central and we want them to learn it, but do they really see that in us? And as families, do they see themselves as they look around to others in the church and in their own circles and even amongst the families of the church? Do they see a sense in which a church is faithful to the things of the Lord? Now, I'm not accusing anybody of anything here, okay? I'm just asking the question. Because that's the kind of question we should be asking ourselves. We should be asking ourselves consistently and regularly, do they see consistency in us between what we say and what we do? Because look, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can never fool your children. When they're observing you, they see right through your words to what you are doing every minute of every day. They're watching mommy and daddy. And they're analyzing what you say by what you do. And they're doing the same thing with us as leaders of the church, as Sunday school teachers, as Wednesday night teachers, as pastors, as elders. They're observing us and they're saying, these men, these women seem to think the Bible is important, but we see something else sometimes, maybe. They talk about prayer being important, but I'm not sure they really believe that. You see? What is the legacy? Do they see us trusting in the Lord, or do they see us whining about what we don't have and afraid of every little thing that God has already promised to protect us from? Do they see us living in fear in the choices they make, or do they see us consistently living out the trust that we had? And for those of us who don't have children in the home, that goes to us as grandparents too, right? What do they see in us? Our children will learn more about faith from watching our response to this world and our commitment to the things the Lord has given us than from anywhere else. You can talk a good game, but they're going to learn more about faith from watching you than they are from listening to you. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't stop talking. We have much to tell them. We have much to teach them. And we should teach them. But our teachings must be consistent. The people of Manasseh and Ephraim were inconsistent. Their faithfulness lacked, even though they saw faithfulness in Joseph. But the daughters of Zelophehad were faithful. They came and said, we have trusted the Lord. He has made a promise to us. We're accepting that promise. We're taking that promise. We have a legacy as well. Let's make sure that we're being consistent in giving that legacy to our children.